The sky over Belgrade burned a crimson red that summer. Smoke rose from the hills, mingling with the heat of the July sun. Somewhere beyond the horizon, drums thundered in rhythm with the pounding of a million hearts. Or so it felt to those inside the battered city walls. The numbers alone were terrifying. Outside the city, 80,000 Ottoman soldiers, the most feared army in the known world, stretched across the plains. Their banners flapped in the wind like a storm of black and red, and the rumble of cannons shook the earth beneath the feet of everyone in Belgrade. The city had never seen an army like this, never an enemy like this. And now it was coming for them. Inside the walls, barely 6,000 defenders waited, knights with gleaming swords, peasants clutching pitchforks, blacksmiths who had never seen a battlefield. Children watched from towers, their eyes wide, wondering if they would ever see the sun rise again. Belgrade was supposed to fall. Everyone expected it. Even the Pope had sent prayers and letters, quietly preparing for the city's inevitable destruction. Europe, still reeling from the fall of Constantinople just 3 years earlier, looked on with dread. If Belgrade fell, it would open the gates of Europe to the Ottomans. Vienna, Venice, Rome, all in peril. And yet something unexpected was about to happen. 3 years earlier, the world had already changed. In 1453, the unconquerable city of Constantinople had fallen to a young sultan named Mehmed II, later known as the Conqueror. The mighty walls that had repelled invaders for over 1,000 years crumbled under his cannons. The city's streets ran red with the blood of defenders and citizens alike, and the Byzantine Empire, once the jewel of Christendom, vanished overnight. Europe watched in horror. Kings whispered in shadowed halls, popes prayed, and armies shivered at the news. The Ottoman Empire was no longer a distant threat. It was a tidal wave rolling across the Balkans, unstoppable and hungry for conquest. Traders fled, nobles panicked, and the simple people of Central Europe wondered if the world as they knew it was coming to an end. Amid this fear, one city stood between Europe and the full force of Mehmed's ambition: Belgrade. Strategically perched on the banks of the Danube, it was more than a city, it was a gate, a fortress, and a symbol. Whoever controlled Belgrade controlled the river, the trade routes, and the path into the heart of Europe. Its fall would mean a free path for the Ottoman armies to march westward. Vienna, Buda, Venice, none would be safe. Mehmed knew this. His ambitions were clear. He was young, ruthless, and already victorious. Constantinople had been just the beginning. Europe, fractured by petty wars and distrust among its kingdoms, seemed incapable of uniting against him. Even the greatest kings hesitated. Europe's armies were scattered, borders were fragile, and yet all hope for stopping the Sultan now rested on the walls of Belgrade. The Pope issued warnings and letters, urging leaders to form an army, but words alone could not raise soldiers, feed the hungry, or repair crumbling fortifications. Europe could only watch as the shadow of the Ottoman army stretched closer, casting darkness over villages, towns, and entire regions. Fear spread faster than news of the enemy. Amid the fear and chaos sweeping across Europe, one man stood apart. John Hunyadi, a seasoned warrior, scarred by countless battles, hardened by years of fighting the Ottomans, was no stranger to the horrors of war. Yet even he could not hide from the truth. Belgrade's survival rested on his shoulders. Hunyadi had spent decades at the frontier, facing the Ottoman advance with courage and cunning. He had tasted victory, but also defeat, each leaving its mark on his body and soul. His campaigns had earned him both respect and enemies. Among the Hungarian nobility, some saw him as reckless, others as arrogant, but all recognized his skill. Still, political intrigue and courtly rivalries had weakened his influence, making it difficult to rally a proper army. Despite this, Hunyadi understood the stakes. The Ottoman Empire was not just another enemy, it was a machine of conquest, disciplined and relentless. Constantinople had fallen, and Mehmed II was already casting his gaze westward. If Belgrade fell, the Danube would be open, Hungary would crumble, and the way into Europe itself would be clear. Hunyadi knew that hesitation meant catastrophe, but this was not just another battle for him. It was personal. He had seen countless villages burned, families slaughtered, and soldiers cut down in campaigns that stretched for decades. He knew the cost of failure, and it haunted him. Yet he also knew that courage could turn the tide, even against impossible odds. When Hunyadi arrived at Belgrade, the city's walls were battered, the defenders exhausted, and the morale fragile. The task ahead seemed impossible. Thousands of poorly trained volunteers and peasants, a handful of knights, against tens of thousands of seasoned Ottoman soldiers. Still, he did not falter. Every decision, every movement, every word he spoke carried weight. He drilled his soldiers, organized defenses, and prepared the city for what would be its greatest test. In Hunyadi, Europe saw both a hero and a desperate man burdened by duty. He was the calm in the storm, the strategist among the fearful, the man who would have to turn fear into courage if Belgrade was to survive. For the people inside the walls, he was hope, and for the Sultan outside, he was the obstacle standing between ambition and conquest. The pieces were in place, the armies would soon meet, and history was about to be written on the battered stones of Belgrade. While Hunyadi prepared the city with strategy and steel, another figure moved among the people, armed only with words, faith, and fire in his heart. John of Capistrano, a Franciscan friar from Italy, was no soldier. He had no army, no armor, no wealth. What he had was conviction and a voice that could stir courage even in the most fearful heart. Capistrano traveled barefoot through towns and villages, preaching relentlessly about the threat of the Ottoman army. He spoke of Belgrade as the last bastion of Christendom, a city whose survival could save Europe itself. His sermons were not gentle appeals, they were fiery calls to action. He condemned hesitation, mocked cowardice, and promised salvation for those who would take up arms to defend the faith. And it worked. Ordinary men, farmers, blacksmiths, shepherds, even old men and teenagers answered his call. They left their homes, abandoned their plows, and gathered whatever weapons they could find. Rusty swords, farming tools, bows with frayed strings, they brought them all. It was not an army by any conventional measure, but it was a force fueled by belief, desperation, and sheer determination. Nobles and trained soldiers often scoffed at Capistrano's peasant crusade, dismissing it as chaotic and ineffective. But Hunyadi recognized its value. The friar's followers could reinforce the city, bolster morale, and most importantly, demonstrate to the Ottomans that Belgrade's defenders would not yield. Together, Hunyadi and Capistrano formed an unlikely partnership: strategy and faith, steel and spirit. Capistrano's presence transformed the city. Fear began to mix with resolve. Families dared to hope. Peasants became soldiers. Villagers became defenders. And in the shadows of Belgrade's battered walls, a sense of purpose took root. Europe had armies scattered and divided, but within Belgrade, ordinary men and women, led by a monk and a general, were preparing to do the impossible. Against overwhelming odds, they were ready to fight. The stage was set not only for a battle of swords and cannons, but for a test of courage, faith, and the human spirit itself. By the time the Ottoman army encircled Belgrade, the defenders were a patchwork force of desperation and courage. Barely 6,000 strong, they were vastly outnumbered by Mehmed II's 60,000 to 80,000 troops. Elite janissaries, heavy cavalry, and experienced artillerymen loomed across the plains, while inside the city, knights, peasants, and volunteers prepared for the fight of their lives. The defenders were far from uniform. There were battle-hardened knights, trained in the arts of war, disciplined and armored. Beside them stood peasants armed with farming tools. men who had never held a sword in battle. Blacksmiths, carpenters, even monks and clerics joined the line, brandishing what they could carry. Some were armed with bows, others with pikes, and a few wielded rusty axes or knives. Every soul had one thing in common: determination to survive and defend their home. In stark contrast, the Ottomans were a war machine. Thousands of janissaries, highly trained, deadly, and loyal to the Sultan, formed the core of the army. Cavalry charged with precision, archers rained death from a distance, and massive cannons pounded the city walls day and night. Engineers dug tunnels, prepared mines, and plotted breaches. Every element of the Ottoman force was designed to crush resistance quickly and efficiently. Yet, despite the odds, the defenders found strength in unity. Hunyadi's experience gave them strategy. He positioned his knights to cover weak points and used the terrain to their advantage. Capistrano's sermons lifted morale, giving courage to those who might have fled in terror. Peasants trained quickly in the use of pikes and bows, forming ranks beside the seasoned soldiers. Even women and children contributed, carrying water, repairing walls, and supporting those who fought. This was no polished army. It was a motley crew of misfits, volunteers, and the desperate. But it was determined, resourceful, and fearless in the face of an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Each defender knew that failure meant annihilation. Each soldier understood that their courage might be the only thing standing between Europe and conquest. The journey to Belgrade was long, grueling, and filled with uncertainty. Hunyadi's forces moved steadily across the hills and plains, their armor clanking, their banners flapping in the summer wind. Each step brought them closer to a city under siege and a confrontation that seemed impossible. Around them, the land bore the marks of Ottoman expansion. Villages burned, fields abandoned, and the occasional column of scouts moving like shadows across the horizon. Beside Hunyadi, John of Capistrano moved barefoot among the people. He preached with fire and conviction, calling on the defenders to find courage in their faith. Farmers who had never held weapons now carried pikes and axes. Villagers who had feared the very sound of a drum now marched to its rhythm, ready to face the enemy. Fear was present, yes, but it was mixed with determination, hope, and an almost tangible sense of purpose. As they neared Belgrade, the first signs of the Ottoman army appeared. Smoke rose from the outskirts, the clang of hammer on metal drifted over the fields, and banners fluttered across the skyline like a sea of red and black. Scouts reported the vast numbers of soldiers, the campfires stretching for miles, and the thunder of cannons in the distance. For a moment, even the most seasoned warriors felt the weight of what lay ahead. Yet the defenders pressed on. Hunyadi knew hesitation would be fatal. Every march, every countermarch, every careful placement of men and supplies mattered. The city awaited them, battered and hungry, but not yet broken. Every step brought them closer to the walls they must defend, closer to the battle that could decide the fate of Europe. The air was heavy with anticipation. Every sound, the caw of a bird, the rustle of grass, the distant boom of a cannon, felt amplified, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The stage was set, the players in position, and the story of Belgrade was about to unfold. Europe watched silently, unaware of the courage and chaos that were about to collide on the Danube's banks. And in the hearts of the defenders, one thought burned bright: we will not let this city fall. July 4, 1456. The day the world outside Belgrade waited for the inevitable. The Ottoman army had arrived in full force, surrounding the city like a storm about to break. From the moment dawn touched the walls, the roar of cannons and the crack of artillery shook the earth. Stones flew through the air, tearing apart towers, gates, and homes, as smoke and dust blanketed the city. The defenders were ready, but readiness could not erase fear. Knights gripped their swords, peasants clutched spears, and even women carried water and stones to pour on any attackers who dared climb the walls. Every day, Every hour, every moment felt like an eternity. The bombardment was relentless, hammering at the city with the weight of the Ottoman Empire behind it. Sleep became impossible, rest a luxury none could afford. From the Turkish camps, janissaries observed the walls, calculating the exact moments to strike. Engineers dug tunnels beneath the fortifications, planting explosives, while archers fired incessantly from the towers. Fear was a weapon as much as the cannonballs. Civilians cowered in cellars, praying that the stones falling above would not claim them. Yet the defenders did not yield. Hunyadi moved through the city, inspecting the fortifications, giving orders, and keeping morale high. He patched breaches, repositioned archers, and reminded his men that their courage mattered as much as their weapons. Capistrano marched among the soldiers, raising a cross, chanting prayers, and shouting words that ignited bravery even in the weakest hearts. The first week passed. The walls shuddered, towers crumbled, and the city's once pristine streets were now littered with rubble and blood. But Belgrade held. Every assault was repelled, every breach contested. The defenders fought not for glory, not for fame, but for survival. And as the sun set each evening, the city's lights, dim, flickering, yet unbroken, stood as a testament to their unyielding will. This was more than a siege. It was a battle of endurance, of spirit, of human resilience. The Ottoman army, confident in its numbers and artillery, began to understand that this fight would not be easy. The defenders were fewer, weaker, and exhausted, but they had something the Sultan could not calculate: the unbreakable resolve of people who refused to surrender. Belgrade had withstood the first storm, but Mehmed II, ever ambitious and ruthless, had yet to unleash his full fury. The decisive clash, the battle that would decide the fate of the city and Europe, was still to come. While the city endured the relentless bombardment, Hunyadi knew that Belgrade could not hold indefinitely without supplies. Food, weapons, and reinforcements were desperately needed. The Ottoman army had blocked the Danube, hoping to starve the city into surrender. But Hunyadi would not let that happen. He planned a bold, audacious strike, a river assault that few believed could succeed. Under the cover of darkness, small boats slipped quietly along the river. Soldiers crouched low, bows ready, oars barely disturbing the water. Smoke from distant campfires lit the horizon, but careful timing kept the Hungarian flotilla unseen. Their mission was simple: break through the Ottoman blockade and deliver vital supplies to the besieged city. Then chaos erupted. Ottoman patrols spotted the boats. Fire arrows flew, cannons roared, and the river became a deadly battlefield. Hunyadi's men fought with desperation and precision, ramming enemy vessels, boarding ships, and engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The night echoed with shouts, splintering wood, and the clash of steel against steel. Against all odds, the flotilla succeeded. Supplies reached the walls. Soldiers, fresh and ready, reinforced the defenders. Hunyadi had not only delivered food and weapons, he had delivered hope. Morale surged inside Belgrade. The city, battered and bloodied, now had a fighting chance against an enemy 10 times its size. This maneuver shocked the Ottomans. They had expected the city to weaken under siege, not grow stronger. For a brief moment, the balance shifted. The defenders could now resist longer, counterattacks were possible, and the Sultan realized that Belgrade would not fall quietly or easily. The river had become a battlefield, the small Hungarian flotilla a lifeline, and Hunyadi's daring gamble had proven that courage and ingenuity could bend the course of history. Belgrade had survived another day, but the Sultan's ultimate assault loomed on the horizon. Soon, the clash of empires would reach its terrifying peak. Days of bombardment had softened the city's defenses, but Mehmed II was not satisfied. The Sultan, determined to crush Belgrade once and for all, prepared his full assault. Every cannon, every janissary, Every unit of cavalry was readied for a decisive strike. The ground shook as the Ottoman army advanced in calculated precision, the air thick with the smell of smoke, powder, and fear. Engineers had tunneled beneath the walls, setting explosives and undermining towers. Massive wooden siege towers rolled forward under the cover of cannon fire. Janissaries, trained killers and masters of the battlefield, formed disciplined columns, while archers rained death from the flanks. Every element of the Ottoman war machine converged on the city at once. Inside Belgrade, the defenders braced themselves. Knights and soldiers stationed at the breaches, pikes bristling, bows drawn, axes ready. Peasants clutched whatever weapons they had, standing shoulder to shoulder with seasoned fighters. Hunyadi moved swiftly along the walls, directing men, plugging gaps, and preparing for the moment when the enemy would reach the gates. Capistrano rallied the volunteers, waving crosses and shouting prayers that cut through the chaos. The attack began with a roar. Explosions shook the walls, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. Soldiers poured through breaches, ladders climbed against towers, and the clamor of battle filled every street. Cannon fire tore through walls, shattering stone and terrorizing defenders. The city seemed on the brink of collapse. Yet Belgrade did not yield. Every advance by the Ottomans was met with ferocious resistance. Knights fought to buy time. Peasants hurled stones and boiling oil. Arrows streaked through the smoke. Civilians helped carry supplies, tend the wounded, and reinforce barricades. Each person became part of a vast, desperate defense, holding the line against overwhelming odds. For hours, the city teetered between survival and destruction. Mehmed's hammer fell with fury, but the defenders refused to break. Every wall held, every breach contested, every life committed to a singular purpose. Belgrade would not fall, at least not yet. The full assault had begun, and the fate of the city, and perhaps Europe, hung by the thinnest of threads. The sun set on July 21st, 1456, and the city of Belgrade held its breath. The Ottoman army had gathered every ounce of strength for a final, decisive assault, determined to crush the defenders once and for all. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the acrid scent of gunpowder, while the distant thunder of cannons shook the city to its foundations. From the northern breaches to the southern walls, Janissaries surged forward. Siege towers rolled into position, ladders were raised, and arrows darkened the sky. Inside, the defenders fought with every ounce of strength they had. Knights swung their swords with precision and fury. Peasants thrust pikes at every enemy who climbed the walls, and civilians hurled stones and boiling oil from above. Blood mixed with dust in streets that had become battlegrounds, turning the city into a chaotic nightmare of steel, fire, and fear. The Ottoman troops broke through in several sections. For the first time, the invaders were inside Belgrade. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in narrow streets, doorways, and collapsed buildings. Shouts, screams, and the clash of swords echoed off the stone walls. Panic threatened to spread, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed the city might finally crumble under the Sultan's might. But Hunyadi and his commanders did not waver. He moved through the chaos, rallying exhausted men, directing reinforcements, and inspiring those who thought hope was gone. Capistrano, barefoot and unarmed, strode among peasants and soldiers alike, urging them to hold fast and keep faith. Every life mattered, every act of courage a potential turning point. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, the defenders held key positions. They slowed the attackers, funneled them into narrow streets, and struck with deadly precision. The Ottomans could advance, but they could not seize the city entirely. Each street became a trap, each wall a line of resistance, and each heartbeat a defiance against the Sultan's ambition. By midnight, the night seemed endless. Belgrade was battered, bloodied, and trembling, but it had not fallen. The Ottoman assault, as overwhelming as it was, had been contained. For the defenders, it was a moment of desperate triumph. For Mehmed II, it was a night that would haunt him. The city teetered on the edge of annihilation, and yet it remained. The next day would bring a shocking, unexpected twist that would turn the tide of history. Dawn broke over Belgrade with a tense, uneasy calm. The night had been brutal, and both sides were exhausted. The Ottoman assault had pushed deep into the city, yet the defenders had held on by sheer will. Then, something extraordinary happened. A small group of peasants and volunteers, exhausted and desperate, surged forward beyond the ruined gates, not on orders, but out of instinct and frustration. They attacked the nearest Ottoman trenches, shouting wildly, their voices carrying like thunder across the battlefield. What should have been a reckless charge now became a spark that ignited hope. Hunyadi saw it and recognized an opportunity. What seemed like a chaotic mistake could be turned into a strategic advantage. He rallied his knights and soldiers, coordinating a full counterattack that pushed from the walls into the exposed Ottoman lines. Archers rained arrows from the towers, while infantry struck from behind, trapping the invaders between city defenders and Hunyadi's organized forces. The effect was immediate and devastating. Ottoman soldiers, surprised by the sudden aggression, faltered. Trenches that had seemed impregnable were abandoned. Artillery crews fled, leaving cannons and supplies behind. Panic spread through the Ottoman ranks as the tide of battle shifted. What had begun as a desperate gambit by untrained villagers had become a full-scale counteroffensive. By mid-morning, the once invincible army of Mehmed II was in retreat. The defenders, battered and bloodied, pressed the advantage, chasing their enemies from the city and forcing them back across the plains. The walls of Belgrade, though scarred, stood unbroken. The accidental counterattack had transformed the siege. A city that seemed destined to fall had become a symbol of courage, strategy, and resilience. The impossible had been achieved, not through sheer numbers, but through a combination of leadership, daring, and the unyielding spirit of ordinary people. Belgrade had survived, and in doing so, it would echo through history as the city where hope overcame overwhelming odds. By midday, the tide of battle had turned completely. The Ottoman army, once a disciplined and unstoppable force, now faced confusion, panic, and retreat. Hunyadi's counterattack had shattered their formations, leaving soldiers scattered across the plains, equipment abandoned, and morale in tatters. What had seemed inevitable, the fall of Belgrade, had been reversed in a single, desperate stroke of courage. Mehmed II, the Sultan of the world's most feared army, rode through the chaos trying to rally his men. His commands were drowned out by the shouts of fleeing soldiers, the clash of steel, and the cries of the wounded. For the first time, his reputation as the Conqueror faced a crushing challenge. The mighty army that had taken Constantinople now retreated, leaving behind cannons, tents, and hundreds of dead. Inside the city, the defenders could scarcely believe what they saw. Exhausted peasants, weary knights, and battered soldiers stared in disbelief as the enemy turned and fled. Joy mingled with exhaustion. Relief mingled with grief for the lives lost. The streets of Belgrade, still smoldering from the siege, became a symbol of triumph against all odds. Hunyadi and Capistrano moved among their people, tending to the wounded, reinforcing defenses, and ensuring that the retreating Ottomans could not regroup immediately. They had survived a siege that should have been impossible, repelled an empire, and preserved a city that stood as a shield for Europe itself. Belgrade had held. Against overwhelming numbers, against relentless bombardment, against fear and exhaustion, the defenders had achieved what history would remember as nothing short of miraculous. The Ottoman lines were broken, the threat temporarily repelled, and the city's battered walls had become a beacon of courage. Belgrade had survived. The impossible had been achieved. Europe breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the victory came at a steep price. The city streets were littered with the wounded and dead. Fires smoldered among the rubble, and the echoes of battle lingered like a shadow over every wall and alley. Even among the victors, suffering was immense. Soldiers, knights, and peasants alike were exhausted, starved, and ravaged by disease. Within weeks, plague swept through the city, claiming many of those who had survived the siege. Among the fallen was John Hunyadi, the very man whose strategy and leadership had held the city together. His death marked the end of an era, a painful reminder that even triumph carries sacrifice. John of Capistrano, too, would not long survive the aftermath, leaving Europe to remember their courage rather than their final days. Yet the victory resonated far beyond Belgrade. The Pope, in gratitude, ordered that church bells be rung at noon, a tradition that continues to this day, as a symbol of the defenders' courage. Europe had been shielded, if only temporarily, from the Ottoman advance. The city had become a beacon of hope, proving that even the mightiest empire could be stopped by determination, strategy, and the unbreakable spirit of ordinary people. Mehmed II retreated, wounded in pride if not in body, and reassessed his ambitions. Belgrade would rise again as a frontier, a bulwark against further conquest, and a symbol of resistance for generations. The city had survived, but the cost was etched into its walls and the hearts of all who fought there. Victory had been claimed, but it was not without loss. The siege left a lasting mark, a reminder that even the smallest force can turn the tide of history when courage meets opportunity. The Siege of Belgrade was more than a battle. It was a turning point in European history. A city that seemed destined to fall became a symbol of resistance against an unstoppable force. The courage of 6,000 defenders, facing an army more than 10 times their size, demonstrated that strategy, determination, and belief could triumph over sheer numbers. Belgrade's survival delayed the Ottoman advance into Central Europe. Cities like Vienna, Venice, and Buda gained precious time to prepare, while Europe collectively learned the value of unity, leadership, and resilience. The battle became a legend, inspiring generations of soldiers, leaders, and ordinary people who faced overwhelming odds. The Siege of Belgrade remains a testament to the unbreakable human spirit, a story of hope in the darkest hours, and a lesson that courage can, indeed, change the course of history.